I saw what happened, didn't you?
My father died and left one final order, that I marry Brandon Ashworth for 2 years, and I obeyed. I married the coldest man I've ever known, sleeping in separate rooms within our own home, but that was never what hurt me. What destroyed me was knowing he felt exactly the same way I did. And yet, in the middle of a party, in front of everyone, he raised his glass and said, "I never loved you. This was always a contract." I thought he wanted me gone. The truth was much, much worse. Hi, I'm Kay. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Sealed Promise. The priest finished the prayer, and I didn't hear half of it. The wind in Providence had its own way of slipping through the collar of a black coat, and that morning it made a point of reminding me that I was still alive, standing before an open rectangle in the ground. My father used to say that a gardener doesn't cry for the flower he planted himself. In my childhood, I thought that was poetic. As an adult, standing before his casket, I thought it was unfair. Bree was by my side, holding my elbow with both hands. She was my best friend, a colleague at the same public school, and the official witness to all the small tragedies of my life. That day, she was working overtime on a big one. There were few of us around the grave. 3 colleagues from the landscaping company where my father worked recently, the downstairs neighbor from our building, the owner of the corner bakery in a worn-out suit, and Mr. Whitmore, the lawyer, standing a few paces away with a leather briefcase under his arm. We had cried all there was to cry at the hospital, sleepless nights, his cold hand in mine, the morphine pushing my father's consciousness to the other side of the room. When he closed his eyes, I had already emptied the part of my soul that still knew how to weep. What remained was a harsh silence, and silence was what I brought to the cemetery. "Maddie," Bree whispered, "we can go." I nodded, but I didn't move. I was only able to leave after the priest touched my shoulder, and Mr. Whitmore took the first step toward the black car waiting at the exit. My feet obeyed Bree before they obeyed me. In the car, Bree spoke for both of us. She talked about the wet asphalt despite the clear sky, about the strange weather for the season, about the cake recipe her mother was going to send me next week. She knew that if she left me in silence, I would collapse before we reached the lawyer's street, so she didn't let that happen. I had never been so grateful for a woman who talked too much. Mr. Whitmore's office was in an old building downtown, with a wrought iron gate elevator that still operated by a hand crank. We went up 3 floors without exchanging a word. When the door opened, he led us into a small room with a dark green carpet and the smell of old paper, and pointed me to a leather chair that must have been as old as my father. "Sit down, Madeline," he said, his voice worn like someone who had had this conversation many times. "Your father left few things, but they were well organized. The Federal Hill apartment, a box of garden tools, and the cottage in Narragansett that came from your mother's family, the one he kept closed for 18 years because he had neither the heart to sell it nor to go back. It's all in your name, awaiting probate. The key is under the clay pot on the porch, just like it was in your mother's time. But before the formal probate, he asked me to hand this directly to you." He pulled 2 envelopes from the briefcase. One was white, sealed, with my nickname written in the slightly shaky handwriting of his final months. Maddie, just that. The other was thicker, with no name on the front, featuring a sentence in the firmer script of an earlier time. "Open only if the first one worked out." "Your father asked that you open the first one now," Mr. Whitmore said. "The second, you keep." He was emphatic about that. I held the envelope with both hands. Bree, sitting beside me, went silent for the first time since the cemetery. The lawyer stepped away out of discretion, without actually leaving the room. I broke the seal with my nail and pulled out a sheet folded in 3. My father's handwriting occupied less than 6 lines. It wasn't a letter, it was an instruction. "Maddie, marry Brandon Ashworth, 2 years. Don't ask me why. One day you'll understand. I love you, Dad." I tucked the second envelope into my purse without opening it. The lawyer nodded with the discretion of someone who had already fulfilled his part. I read it twice. On the 3rd time, Bree leaned in and read it too. I heard her catch her breath. "Maddie, who is Brandon Ashworth?" I asked the lawyer. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat. "Your father left only a name, a phone number, and an address in Newport. He asked me that, if you agreed to fulfill what's written there, I should make the call. Did he know I would do it? He put it this way: my daughter doesn't disobey a serious request, and this is the most serious one I've ever made of her." I closed my eyes for a second. Outside the window, A horn cut through the city air. Inside, I was in my father's lawyer's leather chair, holding a piece of paper asking me to marry a stranger. "Call him," I said. Mr. Whitmore blinked. "Pardon me? Call him. Now. I want to hear this man's voice before I decide anything." Bree let out a low sigh beside me. The lawyer hesitated long enough to check the card inside the folder. Then he dialed the push-button phone on the desk and put it on speaker, at my request. 3 rings, a click, and a voice. Ashworth, that was it. One word, spoken by a busy man who didn't care to hide it. Deep, devoid of affection, with a crispness in the consonants of someone who never needed to shout to be heard. "Mr. Ashworth, this is Percival Whitmore, Aaron Vance's attorney. I have his daughter beside me. Aaron was buried earlier today. Madeline has opened the envelope." There was a pause on the other side of the line. Not long, 3-4 seconds, but heavy. "I'll send a car the morning after tomorrow," he said. I leaned toward the phone. "It's me speaking now. Madeline, I wanted to hear your voice first." Another pause. Shorter. "Have you heard it?" "I have." Then it settled. His voice didn't rise, didn't fall, didn't change temperature. "The car will come to the address Whitmore has. Bring only the essentials. We'll handle the rest in Newport." And he hung up. Mr. Whitmore looked at the device with an expression I only translated much later. Relief that it was over quickly, and shock that his own voice was still there. "He sounds like a piece of ironed ice," Bree whispered. I didn't answer, because that was exactly it, and because, despite it, I already knew I was going to get into that car on the appointed morning. On the street, Bree caught a taxi. I didn't have a car, and my father had sold the truck months earlier to cover bills I didn't even know existed. On the way to the apartment in Federal Hill, I looked out the taxi window and didn't recognize the city where I was born. Providence had become smaller, the size of a dead father. I walked up the 3 floors slowly, Bree behind me. I opened the door, and the smell inside made me sit on the hallway floor. Bergamot, my father's cheap cologne, which he hadn't used in months, but the scent was still there. Bree made tea, because Bree made tea when the world ended. While the water boiled, I went to his desk. There was a shoebox on top of the desk that I had seen 1,000 times and never opened. That day, I opened it. Inside were bills, a thick stack, folded with the punctual care of a man organized even in poverty. Experimental treatment at a hospital in Boston, months of intermittent hospitalizations, imported medications. Almost all the papers had a paid stamp, with the name of a fund I had never heard of in my life, on dates prior to everything I knew about my father's illness. Only one was open, the final bill in his name, with my signature beside it. A co-signature I had done without reading, some time ago, because he asked and I trusted him. The numbers on that open bill blurred my vision. It wasn't just debt. It was a debt large enough to swallow the apartment, the furniture, my meager teacher's savings, and still ask for more. And there was a second thing beneath the numbers, which I didn't yet know how to name. Someone, in a faceless fund, had paid for everything that came before, without my father telling me, without me having the means to pay it back. I shoved the papers into the box and closed the lid with both hands. Bree walked in with 2 mugs and stopped in the middle of the room when she saw me on the floor. "Maddie, what is this?" "He was treated in Boston." "I know. How did he pay for it?" She placed the tea on the table. She sat beside me in silence. I finally looked at her and spoke in a very low voice. "Now it's more than a promise. If I don't go, I lose even the address that was his. Do you think this guy knows?" I thought about saying no, but the voice from the other side of the line came back to my head. That icy clarity, the contained haste, the 3 seconds before I'll send a car the morning after tomorrow. A man who doesn't ask questions. A man who already knew I was going to say yes. "I think he knows," I replied. Bree held my hand. I packed my bag that same night. Just one. A rolling suitcase that had belonged to my mother. It didn't hold much. Simple dresses, 2 of my father's books, the bottle of bergamot, a small box of seeds he kept in the drawer, my documents. I wrote a notice for the school. When I finished, I propped the suitcase next to the door, standing upright like a witness. Bree looked at me from the end of the sofa. "What if he's a monster, Maddie?" I thought of my father, of his hands, of the low songs he sang while washing dishes, of the way he chose flowers from the florist on Saturdays, of a man who, even while dying, had chosen his final word carefully. "My father wouldn't send me to a monster," I said. "Even dead, he wouldn't do that to me." Chapter 2. The Marble Mansion. Days later, the car arrived at the exact time. A black sedan with tinted windows stopped in front of the building with the engine running, and the driver in a gray suit stepped out with his arms crossed at waist height. Bree was at my window with a cold coffee in her hands, pretending she wasn't crying. I went down the stairs with the suitcase. The driver opened the back door, said "ma'am" in a way that made me feel awkward, and stowed the bag in the trunk. I sat on the leather seat, pulled the seatbelt, and didn't look back. If I looked at Bree in the window, I wouldn't be able to get into the car. The road led out of Providence toward the south. The driver didn't speak. I kept looking at the gray sky through the glass, and silently counting the miles between what I had been the week before and what I was about to become. A little over an hour later, Newport appeared all at once, grayish light, trees twisted by the Atlantic wind, summer mansions closed for the cold season. The car turned down an avenue of leafless sycamores, a black iron gate opened on its own, and the mansion appeared at the end of the gravel. Gray stone, 2 long wings, narrow vertical windows. It wasn't a house, it was a living being of stone, planted before the sea for a century, with the appearance of something that buries the people who live inside and remains whole. The driver stopped at the foot of the stairs, got out, opened my door, and took out my suitcase. I stepped onto the gravel in my flat shoes and felt the Atlantic wind for the first time in my life, a cold, different from the city cold, the cold of a place where neighbors don't exist. A woman in her late 60s appeared at the top of the stairs, white hair pulled into a tight bun, a dark gray high-collared dress, hands folded at her waist. She waited for me to climb the steps to reach her before moving. "Mrs. Ashworth," she said, and her voice didn't warm as she pronounced the surname. "I am Perpetua Danforth, housekeeper of this home for many years. Your room is ready. Mr. Ashworth returns from Boston in the late afternoon and has requested that you dine together later. In the meantime, I ask that you settle in. You can call me Madeline," I said, with a small smile she didn't return. "Mrs. Ashworth is the form of address in this house," she replied. "Follow me, please." We entered through the hall. The ceiling was so high that my breath rose before my head did. Marble on the floor, a long chandelier, 2 corridors opening at angles, a double staircase at the back. 3 staff members crossed the foyer while I passed, and none of them looked in my direction for more than half a second. Perpetua walked 3 steps ahead of me. She carried my suitcase by herself, despite my protest. We went up the right staircase. On the landing, she turned toward the east wing. The hallway carpet was dark red, ancient, with a thin runner down the middle. We passed 3 closed doors, and she opened the 4th. "Your suite," she said. "The bathroom is behind that door. Wardrobe to the left. Window faces the garden. Let me know if you need anything." I hesitated at the threshold. "And I started, but I couldn't say husband out loud. "Is in the west wing," she answered, with the short intonation of someone who had already decided not to be questioned. She closed the door. Her footsteps faded into the carpet. I stood in the middle of the room with the suitcase by my feet. The room was too beautiful for someone like me. A canopy bed, a dark wood dresser, a cream sofa under a massive window, a vase with white peonies on the round table in the corner. Everything clean, everything organized, everything designed to impress the marble of the house, not the person sleeping there. I opened the suitcase and took out 3 pieces. I folded them on the bed without putting them in the closet, because I didn't want to unpack anything yet. I went to the window, pulled back the heavy curtain, and looked outside for the first time since entering that house. And it was there, before what I saw in the garden, that my breath left me. Below my window, stretching across a massive square of meticulously cared-for earth, was a rose garden. Not just any garden. A garden designed by hands I knew. The flower beds were shaped like an S, with a central circle where the oldest roses occupied the core. One of the wings was dominated by copper-colored petals, arranged by height. The other wing had white roses with pale centers, and the scent that even through the closed window I could guess. And a row in the back, isolated, with pale pink roses wrapped around an old branch. I had seen that design on paper, many times, folded on our kitchen table in Providence. On the Saturdays, my father would sit with a pencil and ruler and explain to me that a good English garden starts with broken symmetry. That garden, right there below, was my father's design. I leaned my hand against the cold glass. I couldn't remember the last time I felt cold like that. I stood there for too long. The sun dipped an inch over the sea. The shadow of the sycamores stretched across the lawn, and I remained. Someone knocked at the door at some point. Perpetua, I imagine, calling for dinner. I replied without turning around that I was coming down. I lingered a minute longer, my forehead pressed against the pane. "Dad," I whispered to the garden, and to the only man who could hear me that way, "what did you do here before me?" I went down some time later, in a black jersey dress my mother used to call an interview dress. No shine, no flair, nothing that said "excuse me." Perpetua was waiting at the base of the stairs and led me to the dining room without a word. The room was long. A dark wood table for 12 occupied the center, with 2 places set at one end, facing each other. White candles in silver candelabras, crystal glasses in 3 sizes, silverware I wouldn't know how to identify in the correct order. And, on one of the walls, a massive painting of a man with dark hair and a black suit, standing, with a white rose in his lapel. "Mr. Ashworth's father," Perpetua said, noticing my gaze. "Deceased, many years ago." She pulled out the chair for me, waited for me to sit, and left through the side door. I stayed alone for a few seconds, staring at the place in front of me. The door on the other side of the room opened, and it was there, amidst the amber light of the candles, that I saw my husband for the first time. Brandon Ashworth was tall, a head and a half taller than me, broad shoulders inside a custom-made dark gray suit, brown hair, combed back with the studied nonchalance of someone who pays for a good barber. Angular face, firm jaw, and the eyes. It was the eyes that cut me in half, gray, like wet stone, devoid of any warmth, fixed on my face for 2 whole seconds before moving. He didn't smile. He walked to the head of the table, pulled his own chair, and sat down. The distance between us was about 6 feet of table. His scent crossed the space. Sandalwood, leather, something expensive I didn't recognize. "Madeline," he said. "Just that." "Brandon." He raised an eyebrow for half a second. "Most people start by calling me Mr. Ashworth. I'm not most people. Your housekeeper already tried." Something quick crossed his face. It wasn't a smile, but it was close. A poor relative of a smile, passing through, before his composure returned. "Perpetua takes the surname seriously," he said. "It's part of her service." "Is it part of her service to hate me too?" This time it was closer to a smile, but he didn't allow it. He picked up his napkin and unfolded it over his knee. "She doesn't hate you. She just doesn't trust you. Those are different things in this house." Perpetua returned with a tureen. She served soup in silence and poured wine into one of the glasses. He refused with a flick of his index finger. I accepted. She left through a side door. The door closed. Brandon cut the silence before any greeting to the dish. "I'm sorry for the loss of your father." "Thank you. He was a good man." I lowered my spoon and looked at him. "You knew him then?" Brandon took a moment to answer. He brushed the edge of the napkin against the corner of his mouth unnecessarily, to gain a second. "I did. He worked here for a while when I was younger. He tended the garden outside my bedroom window, that very one." I felt my breath catch a bit. I gripped the spoon more firmly. "You asked me to come because my father left an instruction," I said, my voice firmer than I expected it to be. "I came because he asked. But I didn't come blindly. So before the soup gets cold, you're going to have to tell me what this is." Brandon lowered the napkin and leaned back in his chair, the wet stone eyes fixed on mine, and didn't move. "I have a contract," he said. "I figured. It's in a folder beside my chair. You read it during dinner and sign after dessert. Or I don't sign. Or you don't sign. And I understand. In that case, Theo Marchetti, my attorney, will settle the terms of compensation for your travel and time." He reached to the side of his chair and pulled a smaller leather folder from a dark leather briefcase, embossed with the Ashworth Hospitality Group crest in the corner. He slid it across the table toward me. The folder glided over the varnish without a sound. I opened it. Perpetua returned at that moment with the main course, and neither of us moved. She placed a fish in front of me with a yellow sauce I didn't taste, and left. I read the entire contract while the fish grew cold, and the candle consumed the wick. Separate rooms, in the second clause. Minimal public appearances, scheduled by the group's PR team. No physical contact without express consent from both parties. A 2-year term, with the possibility of amicable dissolution at any time. A compensation clause at the end, in an amount that made me blink twice before understanding. And amidst technical clauses, a short line. Party A commits to protecting Party B from any public exposure, threat, or risk associated with Party A's position. I closed the folder. I pushed it back, intact, toward his side. Brandon looked up. This time, his gray eyes had a small crest of interest. "Are you refusing?" "Not yet." "Then why return it to me?" I swallowed hard. I gripped the crystal glass more than I drank. It was time to have courage, and that was all I had. I'm going to sign, I said. But first, I need to know one thing, and you're going to answer me while looking me in the face. Why did my father send me to you? Brandon remained silent. It wasn't an empty silence. It was loaded. His jaw moved once, inward. The broad fingers of his right hand closed around the stem of the glass without lifting it. He looked at the painting of his father on the wall, for half a second, and then back at me. Because I owed him, he said. The only thing I had to offer a daughter of his. Security. Security from what? This isn't the night to ask that question. Then this is the night I don't sign. He looked at me for a long moment. Not angry. Calculating. Calculating a stubborn woman he hadn't hired to be stubborn, and adjusting the schedule of his own plan internally. You will have all your answers, Madeline, he said, and for the first time his voice dropped a tone, almost soft, but one at a time. Today the answer is just this. I owed your father, and what I owed is what I am offering you. A home, a name, and security. If that isn't enough, I accept it. I looked at the folder. I thought of the shoebox on my father's desk, of the hospital bills in Boston, of Bree at the apartment window with the cold coffee. I thought of everything I would lose if I walked around that table and left, and I thought, also, that this cold, hard man with stone eyes had looked at his father's painting when I asked the question. He didn't pretend he didn't hear. He answered. Even if it was a half answer, he answered. Lend me a pen, I said. He pulled a silver pen from the inner pocket of his blazer. He handed it over with the same measured gesture he had used to push the folder. I opened to the last page, signed on the top line, and returned the folder and the pen. Dessert can come, I said. I won't be able to eat the fish anyway. This time he almost laughed. A brief sound, through the nose, that didn't quite turn into a laugh, but existed. It was the first crack I saw. I noted it. Perpetua brought a fig compote with chilled cream. I ate out of obligation. Brandon didn't eat anything. He answered 3 of my questions about the house, where the library was, West Wing, first floor. If I could use it at any time, I could. If there was any area I shouldn't enter, the West Wing, without explaining why. Then he stood up, pushed his chair back, and before leaving, rested a hand on the chair back. Perpetua will go up with you. Good night, Madeleine. Good night, Brandon. He hesitated for half a second upon hearing his own name. He left. Perpetua appeared at the door the next instant. She had been waiting on the other side. We climbed the marble staircase in silence. The heels of her shoes and mine clicked on the white stone in different rhythms. In the east corridor, she stopped in front of my door and wished me good night with no inflection at all. She left. I went in. I closed the door with my back. I took off my shoes right there, for the first time all night. I went to the window and pulled the curtain back for the second time. The garden was dark. The moon was thin, but there was a low, discreet spotlight lit in a corner of the central bed, illuminating a single rose bush, the oldest of them, the one in the middle of the circle, from the broken S design. And that was when I saw a figure standing beside the rose. A man, back-turned, tall, in a long coat. Brandon Ashworth's broad shoulders. He wasn't pruning. He wasn't doing anything. He was just standing there, before the rose bush, with both hands in his coat pockets. A man who had just dined with his contract wife upstairs, and instead of going to his office or to bed, went to visit a rose in the middle of the night. I pressed my forehead against the cold pane and whispered, to my father, to that garden, and to the man inside it, Dad, what did you do here before me? The wind lifted some of his hair, down there. Brandon didn't turn around, but I swear he heard me. Chapter 3. Names of Roses and Poisonous Women. 2 days later, I got lost inside my own house. Perpetua had explained to me in the morning that the library was in the West Wing, but I pushed the first set of double doors and found myself in a tea room that had been closed for years, with white sheets covering the furniture. I went back, turned into a narrow gallery with 3 portraits of women from the last century, and only then found the library on the other side. I opened it with both hands. If there was a heaven for book lovers, it was shaped like that room. Mahogany shelves from floor to ceiling, metal rolling ladders, 2 leather armchairs before an unlit fireplace, a long table in the center. I walked around without touching anything for a while. The volumes were in English, French, and German. Some titles I knew from seeing them at the school where I worked, others only from my dreams as a literature teacher who never had the money to collect them. An entire shelf in the west corner held botany books, and that was where my feet led me without asking permission. I pulled out a volume with a worn cover and faded gold lettering, English Gardens of the 19th Century. The paper was yellowed, the binding smelling of old tobacco. I turned the first page and found a handwritten dedication in black ink faded by time. The handwriting was firm, belonging to someone used to signing documents. That was my father's. His voice came from behind me, low, closer than I expected. I held the book against my chest before turning around. Brandon was standing 2 paces away, with one hand resting on the corner of a bookshelf, suit without a tie, collar open by one button, his left sleeve with an ink mark on the cuff. The gray eyes, illuminated by the yellow light of the candelabra, seemed less like stone and more like still water. "Sorry," I said, and held the book back out to him. "I came in without warning. The library is yours too. You can always come in." He took the book, but he didn't put it away. He kept it in his large hands, running his thumb along the worn edge of the cover, in a gesture that had the age of a habit. I recognized there a man who had done that before, perhaps hundreds of times, in silence, on days when no one in the house was looking at him. "Did your father like botany?" I asked, because something inside me needed to understand that thumb he learned at the end of his life. Brandon opened the book to the same dedication I had opened and closed it immediately. He said it was the only subject that didn't lie. "And you? Did you inherit the taste?" He looked at me for a second longer than necessary. Then he put the book back on the shelf, at the right height, in the right place, without needing to look. "I inherited the taste from someone else," he replied, and changed the subject before I could pull the thread. "Lunch is served on the winter porch. Perpetua has been looking for me for half an hour." He walked ahead of me through the double doors, and I stayed a moment in the library, looking at the book he had replaced. He learned at the end of his life. He said it was the only subject that didn't lie. My father had told me that once, with hands dirty from the dirt in the apartment backyard, back when I was still little. I went down to the garden after lunch. Perpetua stood at the door watching me go, and said nothing, because the garden wasn't on her list of places to guard. I went down the side staircase, crossed the short grass, and entered through the open gate of the S-shaped bed. The scent of the roses was stronger up close. The copper wing was on the right, ordered by height, from the shortest to the tallest in the back. The white ones were on the left, with pale centers, planted in groups of 3. I touched a copper petal with the tip of my finger, and it fell. My father would have told me that a rose that falls like that is a rose that has already fulfilled its term, and that being grateful for the petal is part of the work. "Grace, darling," his voice made me turn. Brandon was on the gravel path, both hands free at his sides, without his jacket. He had changed into a simple white shirt and dark trousers. The wind lifted a lock of his hair, and he didn't bother to fix it. "What?" "The rose you just touched. Grace, darling. White on the outside, pale pink core. It gave only 1 petal because you arrived before the time." He approached along the gravel path. He stopped a pace away, looking not at me, but at the rose bush in front of me. "And this one?" I pointed to a taller copper flower with ruffled edges. "Souvenir de la Malmaison. It was the first one he planted here." "He?" Brandon didn't answer immediately. He turned his body slightly toward the white wing and pointed to a lower-growing rose bush, with small buds wrapped around an old branch. "Old blush china. This one blooms almost all year round. It needs a short prune at the shoulders, never at the neck." His voice had changed. It wasn't the CEO voice. It wasn't the contract dinner voice. It wasn't the voice on the phone in Mr. Whitmore's office. It was the voice of a man repeating lessons someone had given him with patience, in a time when he was still small enough to listen. "Who did you learn that from?" I asked, because I already knew the answer, and because I needed to hear it from him. Brandon turned his face to me. The still water-gray eyes flickered for half a second to my mouth, and returned to my eyes, with an aim that made me tighten my hand on the lapel of my jacket. "From a good man," he said, and he left before I could pull the thread of the spool again. I stayed among the white roses for longer than I had planned. Their scent was of weekend mornings in Providence, of pencils and rulers on the kitchen table, of a child who drew gardens beside a father who sang softly while washing the dishes. I pressed the loose petal in my jacket pocket, that same old bergamot, and went up the side staircase. A few days later at night, Perpetua delivered a fabric-lined box to my door. Inside was a dark green velvet dress, with wide straps and a slit up to the knee. The note pinned to the box had 5 words in the handwriting of a man who signed documents: Ashworth Hotel, Boston. 8 p.m. Nothing more. The trip from Newport to Boston took an hour and a half. Brandon picked me up in the foyer, already in a tuxedo, looked at the dress on me for a second and a half, and said nothing. He opened the car door and got in on the other side. Through the rearview mirror, the driver looked at me twice. The Ashworth Hotel Boston occupied a stone building with a curved facade. The gala hall was on the high floor, with high ceilings and a gallery surrounding it. Brandon gave me his arm at the entrance and led me through the crowd, greeting 3 people without stopping, and stopping at the 4th, before a woman in a red dress. Celeste Ashworth Vey was taller than me, with thin shoulders and a smile painted in burgundy. The red of her dress, against her fair skin, seemed like an accusation. Brandon introduced her with the dryness of someone fulfilling a family obligation. Celeste is a second cousin, and to her just Madeline. Ah, the mystery wife, Celeste said, her voice honey and needle. She leaned toward me, touched her lips half an inch from my ear, and whispered, in a tone 3 nearby people heard, "Vera Wang doesn't dress just any woman, dear. On you, the dress is small in the wrong places." I breathed through my nose. I felt Brandon 10 feet away, talking to a white-haired man, and realized without looking that he had stopped listening to the man. "Vera Wang dresses women, Celeste," I replied, at the same volume she had used, but with clean pronunciation. "Expensive clothes don't fix posture." Her mouth closed into a thin line. The man beside Brandon laughed for a syllable before disguising it with a cough. On the other side, I saw Brandon turn his head. For the first time that night, the corner of his mouth turned up slightly. Then he approached Celeste with a measured step, rested a hand on her waist with cold familiarity, and said 2 sentences in her ear that I didn't hear. Celeste turned pale down to her lips and vanished from the ballroom before the 3rd glass of the night. I stayed in my place, balancing my drink on my fingertips. On the other side of the hall, Brandon continued talking to the white-haired man, back to the gallery, totally absorbed in the yacht conversation I guessed from a distance by the repeated gesture of his hands. An elderly woman with white hair, in a navy blue dress, approached him from his blind side with a catalog grandma smile. She had a cameo brooch on her collar and a thin ring on her pinky finger, which she turned with her thumb in a repetitive gesture. I realized later, much later, that she had waited for the exact moment Brandon left the hall to approach me, and had chosen the side he couldn't see. "Pardon the intrusion, dear," she said, her voice soft as old perfume. "I heard you answer. I thought it was beautiful. A young woman needs to learn to bite early. I'm Mrs. Hensley, an old family friend. Madeline, I know who you are, dear." She held my hand with both of hers in a warm grip. "I heard you lost your father recently. I'm very sorry. My husband was also a gardener, in his younger years. You recognize a gardener's daughter from a mile away. I don't know why I cried then. It was quick. It didn't even run down. But my eyes filled." Mrs. Hensley squeezed my hand between hers, and her ring turned again under my thumb. I didn't notice the ring. I noticed her hand, which was warm like my father's in his final months. "If you ever need a cup of tea with a boring old lady," she said with a watery smile, "I have a house in Newport. Perpetua knows where." She moved away. I wiped the corner of my eye before anyone else saw. A few minutes later, Theo Marchetti came to find me. I recognized him from Brandon's description. Tall, thin, dark hair combed to the side, blazer a size smaller than it should be. He extended his hand, shook mine firmly, and looked around before speaking. "I need to pull your husband out of a conversation," he said softly. "He's been listening to a man talk about yachts for 10 minutes. "Excuse me." Theo laughed for a syllable. He looked at Brandon across the hall and remarked, without moving his lips, "If you keep looking at your wife like that, Brandon, I'm going to have to rewrite the prenuptial." Brandon, 3 yards from us, heard. He didn't take his eyes off me when he replied, in that same polished stone voice, "Rewrite it." Theo raised both eyebrows at me, in the silent sign of, "Are you hearing this?" and left with Brandon through the side corridor. Celeste returned a few minutes after she left, more contained, and tried to approach Brandon from the gallery side. I intervened first. I found her in a corner of the gallery, alone, with a half-empty glass, and said, without a smile, without inflection, "He's already decided, Celeste. Save what's left of your night." She didn't answer. She left before the party was over. On the way back to Newport, inside the car, the road ran empty, and the driver was separated from us by a dark glass. Brandon stayed silent for about 20 minutes, looking out the window. I had rested my head on the seat and was pretending to sleep. He then spoke, without turning his face. "Did your father teach you the names of the roses?" "He did." Brandon closed his eyes for a second. His jaw moved once, inward. His right hand, resting on his knee, closed without making a sound. "He was the best man I ever knew," he said. I stopped breathing. Brandon Ashworth had never told me at any point that he really knew my father. He had said he worked here for a while, He had said I knew him, but he hadn't said that. That wasn't the contract. That wasn't the half debt from dinner. That was a sentence from a man who has already wept for another man. I turned my face to him. His eyes were still closed. "Brandon," I said, in a whisper. He didn't open his eyes. The road roared low beneath the tires. I had the feeling that, if I insisted one step further, he would raise the barrier again, and the entire night would turn into nothing. So, I didn't insist. I rested my head on the seat again, and closed my eyes too. But for the rest of the way, my heart beat out of rhythm, as if it had discovered a door between two rooms I thought were sealed. And for the first time since I entered that mansion, I thought that maybe my father's promise wasn't a sentence. Maybe it was an address. Chapter 4. The Cabin in the Storm. 6 months later, I was still a woman with 2 doors, one to her suite in the East Wing, one to his suite in the West Wing. Between the two, the red-carpeted hallway, and 6 months of dinners where Perpetua served the soup without looking at either of us. The winter passed slowly. I taught literature 3 mornings a week at a school in Newport, because Perpetua thought I shouldn't stay in that house all day. I read through the library. I wrote letters to Bree. I learned that the cook's name was Hilda, that she had come from Sweden as a teenager, and that she liked to talk while peeling carrots. Over time, Perpetua stopped being just the icy housekeeper. She straightened my collar before a class, warned me that the chamomile tea was in the wrong jar, and started standing by the door while I ate alone. We didn't become friends, but it was something. One morning, at the end of winter, a late condolence letter arrived for me on the breakfast tray. Cream paper, old handwriting, signed in blue ink. Mrs. Hensley lamented my loss in a delicate way, said she had enjoyed meeting me that night in Boston, and suggested tea when I was in Newport, without that circumspect husband lurking around. I found the phrasing odd, but the white-haired old lady had been so sweet in that gallery that I tucked the letter into my cardigan pocket and let it go. I went up to the library with it still in my pocket. I came down half an hour later to get the cardigan, and the letter was no longer there. In its place, folded in 4 on the arm of the armchair, was a clean napkin. I asked Perpetua in the hallway. She answered without stopping. "Old trash, ma'am." I stood in the doorway, watching the back of her head, until she vanished into the West Wing. It was the first time Perpetua had lied to me, and I knew it, but I had nothing to do with that information. I tucked the strangeness into a drawer I didn't yet realize I was opening. During the first month, Brandon was away 3 times on business trips. In the second month, twice. In the third, he stayed more. He began appearing in the library in the late afternoons without warning. He would pick a book from any shelf, sit in the armchair across from mine, and read without interrupting me. The first of those nights I almost ran out. After a few, I found it strange when he didn't show up. Later on, I brought 2 cups of tea instead of 1, and set his on the arm of the armchair without saying anything. He drank it. On the morning he asked me if I would agree to go with him to a meeting in Watch Hill. The sky was a stagnant gray. Perpetua walked in with breakfast. Brandon was already seated at the table, and he passed the subject to me like someone passing a salt shaker. "An old investor," he said, without looking up from the newspaper. "He only receives guests at home and insisted that you come as well. The trip is short. We'll be back before dark." "Why does he want me to go?" "Because he's heard about Ashworth's mystery wife and thinks hotels are a family business." Brandon folded the newspaper in half. "If you'd prefer to stay, I'll tell him you fell ill." I looked at the window. The sea in the distance was the color of iron, but the sky hadn't descended yet, and for months, I hadn't left that house with him. "I'll go," I replied. We left after lunch. Brandon drove. It was the first time I had sat beside him in the front seat of a car, and the car suddenly felt smaller. He had swapped the tuxedo for a gray cotton shirt, no tie, and his left sleeve was rolled up to the middle of his forearm, revealing a thin scar underneath that I had never seen. The coastal road led out of Newport toward the south. The Atlantic appeared to the left for miles, restless, with high foam on the rocks. After about 20 minutes, the first thunder cracked at a distance that could be counted. "The storm wasn't forecast for today," Brandon said, his eyes on the road. "It was forecast for tonight." The forecast arrived early. He laughed a single syllable, softly, through his nose. I turned my face to the window so as not to smile. A few miles later, it started raining. Not just rain, a wall of water. The coastal road vanished in 2 minutes, under a film of water that mirrored the gray of the sky. Brandon slowed down and spent a long time in silence, both hands on the wheel, before saying, "The investor's house is still an hour from here. We won't be able to make it. What do you suggest?" There's a family cabin in Watch Hill, 10 minutes up the road. We'll wait for the rain to pass there." The cabin was smaller than I imagined. 2 rooms, a central fireplace, a wooden table, a stone sink, and a double bed covered with an old patchwork quilt. The windows looked out to the sea, and from there, the sea was a loud, dark wall. Its roof had been built for heavy rain, and the heavy rain fell as if it had been summoned. Brandon lit the fireplace. He crouched for a while, elbows on his knees and a twig in his hands, adjusting the wood. The firelight caught the line of his profile for the first time, and I realized I had never seen this man's face from any angle other than the dinner table. There was a small scar on his right eyebrow that his hair usually hid at home. I sat on the rug before the fireplace, legs tucked to the side. The cabin smelled of old wood and salt. Outside, the rain had risen to a roar that would swallow my name if someone called it. "Brandon," I said, "how did you meet my father?" He stayed with his back turned for a second longer. Then he settled on the rug, too, a bit further away. One hand braced on the floor and his elbow over a bent knee. "He worked here for 2 years. His voice came out low, over the sound of the rain. "He tended the garden when I was a teenager. He taught me the names of the roses because I followed him around. I was an annoying kid. My father loved annoying kids." Brandon smiled sideways. The smile was small but complete, and it slipped from the corner of his mouth to his eyes. "He taught me more things than just names," he continued, and then stopped. His gray eyes went to the fire. "He taught me something important, without ever asking for anything in return. I owe him a debt that money cannot hold. That is why you are here. So I came here in the name of that debt. At first," he turned his face. "Now it's not just that anymore." I held my breath for an instant. The wood crackled. The rain rose in pitch. I looked at him in the firelight, and the still water-gray eyes had thawed a little. Or it was the light. Or it was the wine Hilda had put in the travel bag without me asking. "You know that I walked through the garden almost every morning this winter," I said, because it was true, and because I wanted to see what he would do with it. "The white roses are sleeping under the straw someone covered them with at the end of autumn. Was it you?" Brandon took a moment to answer. He adjusted a log in the fire with the twig, and a spark flew up the chimney. "It was me." "Why?" "Because the man who planted them isn't here to cover them anymore." He looked at me without looking away. "And someone needs to." I swallowed hard. I looked at the wine glass in my hands without drinking. The rain outside had become a continuous, muffled sound, and the cabin seemed like the only quiet point in the world. Brandon stood up, opened the pantry, and found a hard loaf of bread, some leftover cheese wrapped in parchment paper, and a bottle of red wine that looked like it had been forgotten for years. He put it all on the table and pulled out 2 chairs. We cut the bread with a kitchen knife, spread the knife on the cheese, and he opened the old cork wine with his shirt sleeve. We ate for a while in silence, and then I laughed. I laughed because the bread was hard as stone, the cheese soft as clay, the wine too good to accompany it all, and because he was looking at me instead of eating. The laughter came from within the morning, from within the 6 months of the red hallway, from within the contract. Brandon laughed with me. It was the first time I heard his full laugh. It was a low, husky laugh that sounded like it had been kept inside for many years. He laughed, lowered his head, ran his hand through his hair, and the laugh ended in a sigh. Midnight passed without either of us noticing. The rain subsided, and then returned. The fire grew smaller. I took off my shoes at the foot of the chair without thinking. Brandon watched. His eyes lingered on my bare feet for a second, then traveled up the dress, the neck, to my mouth, and stayed there. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended. "Because it's the first time I'm truly seeing you." He stood up. He walked around the table. He crouched before me, close enough for me to feel the heat of his body mixed with the heat of the fireplace. He raised his hand and touched his thumb to my chin, not grabbing, just touching. His question was in the pressure of his thumb. I answered by leaning my forehead against his. The rest of the cabin vanished. His mouth met mine with care. Then he lost the care. The kiss started slowly and turned into something else between the first and second movement, deeper, hotter, with his hand moving up the back of my neck to hold me closer. I grabbed his shirt at chest level with both hands and pulled. He lifted me from the floor in one single move. It wasn't effort. It was a decision. He held me by the waist, pressed his body to mine, and carried me from the fireplace rug to the room next door without stopping the kiss for a moment. The door clicked shut behind us with his shoulder. The patchwork quilt received my weight before his. "Don't ask me to stop," he said against my ear, his voice raspy. "Never." His hands knew the dress before taking it off. Each button on the back came loose at a pace that held no rush. The velvet fell from my shoulders, slid past my hips, and pooled on the floor. He moved up my body with his mouth, stopped at my neck, rested his forehead on my shoulder, and took one deep breath with the urgency of someone drinking water after a long time. I ran my hands over his back, under his open shirt, and felt the old scar at the height of his shoulder blade. He shuddered. It wasn't cold. It was a reaction. His weight on top of me was exact. The scent of sandalwood and leather now held salt and rain. Every movement of his was calculated, but the calculation didn't hide what was underneath. He looked at me between one kiss and another, in the eyes, and didn't look away. I understood that he needed me to be there, whole, with him. "Madeline," he said, in a whisper between two movements, "if I ever tell you to leave, don't go." I opened my eyes. I held his face with both hands. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to remember." I didn't answer. I pressed my mouth to his, and I left the rest of the world outside the windows, with the rain. Afterward, lying against his chest, listening to the now low and steady rain on the roof, I thought of something I didn't have the courage to say out loud. That hadn't been contract sex. That had been the first time in my entire life that someone touched me with the fear of losing me, and I wanted to answer him in kind. His hand, broad and warm, rested on my stomach. His thumb traced a slow circle on my skin. I closed my eyes and let that circle lull me. I woke up with the gray light of morning. The bed was empty on his side. The quilt was folded neatly at the foot of the mattress, the dress hanging on the chair, a glass of water on the nightstand. Brandon was on the sofa in the living area, already dressed, facing the window, looking at the road that had stopped flooding. I dressed slowly. I left the room and stopped at the door. He didn't turn his head. "The rain has passed," he said. "We can go back." "All right." He picked up my bag from the table. He opened the door. The morning had a clean, cold wind, and the sea in the distance was low. He guided me to the car with a courtesy rehearsed for years and opened the passenger door. Inside the car, the road ran dry. He drove looking straight ahead. Neither of us spoke for 40 minutes. When the mansion appeared at the end of the avenue and the iron gate opened on its own, Brandon stopped the car at the curve of the gravel and, without turning off the engine, without turning his face, said, "The contract still stands." I looked at him. I gripped the seatbelt with both hands. My chest rose and fell, but my breathing was steady. "Fine," I replied. "Then if it stands for me too." I got out of the car by myself. I closed the door without slamming it. I walked up the mansion stairs without running. On the hallway balcony, before the window looking out at the rose garden, I stopped for a second and spoke to no one, in the same voice as always. "Fine. It stands for me too." The following weeks were cold. I had lunch in Newport without him. I went to 2 PR events without him. I smiled at photographers with the confidence of a wife who sleeps well at night. During library hours, he still appeared at the door, standing for 2 seconds with his chin raised in a silent request for entry. I would lower my book. He would leave. The tea for the second cup, which I continued to bring on the tray, would go cold on the arm of the empty armchair. Perpetua, who saw everything, commented on nothing. She just started leaving a wool blanket folded on the sofa, where I would fall asleep reading. Bree called late one night. She listened to everything in silence, which was strange for her, and said, "Maddie, that man isn't angry. He's afraid. And a man with fear does stupid things." I hung up. I stared out the window overlooking the corner of the garden where the low spotlight illuminated the same old rose bush, with no man standing beside it that night. I thought of the phrase he had whispered in the cabin, "If I ever tell you to leave, don't go," and I didn't understand. Chapter 5. I Never Loved You. The night of the ball arrived 3 weeks after the morning we returned from the cabin. I had counted each one of them, without wanting to count, in the red hallway between the east suite and the west suite that neither of us crossed. The mansion had been set up for 3 days, chandeliers lowered, new candles, white flowers brought from Providence, a band tuning in the west corner of the ballroom. The Ashworth group was turning 50, and 300 guests had been invited. I chose the dress alone. Brandon sent 3 options in the morning through Perpetua. I sent them all back. I took the one I had bought myself at a fine thrift store in Newport the day I returned from the cabin, a black dress made of heavy silk, without shine, with an open back down to the waist. It wasn't mourning. It was a choice. Perpetua came up on time, looked at the dress, looked at my face, and said nothing. She handed me a pair of antique earrings and left. I went down the main staircase alone. 300 faces turned. Brandon was at the foot of the stairs with an empty glass in his hand. He saw me, and he lost his color for a second. I reached him, took the glass, and placed it on a waiter's tray. Brandon. He didn't answer. He looked at my face with a locked jaw, offered his arm without comment, and led me into the ballroom. Celeste, on the other side, raised her glass in a subtle toast to me, dressed in gold. Her smile alone was a message. Mrs. Hensley appeared near the terrace in a navy blue dress, and came toward me with both hands extended. She hugged me around the waist and touched her lips to my cheek. "How beautiful you look tonight, dear." My old friend would be proud of her daughter-in-law. I smiled at her. She squeezed my shoulder with her left hand, and her thumb slipped over the thin ring on her pinky in a short, repeated circle. I didn't pay attention to the ring. I paid attention to her face, the face of a lady who had known Brandon's mother. Theo Marchetti stopped before me. "Mrs. Ashworth, your husband is in a corner of the gallery reading something on his phone. The toast is in 10. I'll go get him." "No need." Theo looked over my shoulder, and his face isn't that of a man who rehearsed a toast. I turned. Brandon was crossing the ballroom toward us, phone still in hand, and his expression was closed in a way I had never seen. The gray of his eyes had turned to stone again. He stopped 2 paces from me. He looked at Mrs. Hensley, who still had her hand on my shoulder. His eyes fell on her thumb, on the pinky ring, on the repeated movement, and something inside him, I swear, broke in that second. "Brandon, dear," Mrs. Hensley said with a sweet smile. "I came to greet our hostess." "Thank you," he replied, in a tone I didn't recognize. "Excuse us. I need my wife." He took my hand. We crossed the ballroom to the center, before the band. The band lowered their volume. A microphone appeared in his hands. I looked at his face. Brandon looked at the room. The gray of his eyes passed quickly, once, over Mrs. Hensley. It returned to me. It lingered on my face for half a second. And within that half second, I realized something I didn't understand until much later. He was asking my forgiveness before hurting me. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice firm. "Thank you for celebrating 50 years of history with us. Before the formal toast, I would like to thank one person." The faces turned toward me. "I want to thank my wife for having fulfilled a difficult contract for 6 months. Madeleine," he looked directly at me. "I never loved you. This was always a contract, and it expired today." The ballroom stopped. It wasn't silence. It was a vacuum. Someone behind me let out a nervous laugh and swallowed it halfway. 2 women in the west corner lowered their glasses at the same time. I looked at him. The world around us fell apart in slow motion. Celeste with her hand covering her mouth, Perpetua at the side door with a tray frozen in the air, Mrs. Hensley near the terrace with the compassionate face of someone who had seen a tragedy occur. I took off my wedding ring. I took my time. Not because my finger resisted. I took my time because I wanted every one of those 300 faces to see every millimeter of the gesture. There was a crystal table 3 paces from me with an arrangement of white roses in the center. I walked to it without haste. I placed the ring on the crystal and heard the delicate click of metal against glass. I straightened up, looked at Brandon for the last time, and turned my back. I left through the terrace. I went down the side stairs, walked around the east wing, and entered the service parking lot where my own car was parked, with the key on the front tire rim. Perpetua had put it there without being told. I started the engine. I drove without looking in the rearview mirror. The road to Narragansett took nearly 2 hours. My father's cottage by the sea was made of wood painted in a faded blue. The key was under the clay pot in the usual place. I sat on the wicker sofa in my intact black dress, and only there, inside the house of my dead father, did I cry for the first time since the cemetery. Then I wrapped one of his old blankets around my body and slept. Bree called twice. I turned off the phone on the 3rd. 2 days later, in the late afternoon, I heard footsteps on the sand in front of the house. Slow, without haste. I went to the window. Brandon was crossing the low fence on foot, his tuxedo from the ball still wrinkled on his body. He had left the car far away. His face was gray, with 2 full days of no sleep in his eyes. He stopped on the porch. He didn't knock. He waited. I opened the door. I didn't speak. He looked at the floor for an instant and cleared his throat. "I need an hour, if you're willing to listen to me. If not, I'll leave and won't come back." I turned my back without answering and left the door open. I sat on the wicker sofa with the blanket over my shoulders. He entered, closed the door, and stood in the middle of the room with both hands hanging at his sides. No pockets, no glass, no table. I had never seen him without a place for his hands. "My father died when I was 12, he began. "My mother, 4 years before that. I was left in the care of his second wife. Her name was Violet Ashcroft." I tightened the blanket around my shoulders. Violet replaced my nanny, my teacher, the cook. the gardener. In less than a year, the whole house was hers, and when there was no one left who knew me from the inside, she began the punishments. Days without food, the attic locked from the outside, an iron burn on my forearm that she told the doctor had been a laundry accident. Things the boy left behind after a funeral doesn't report because he has no one to tell. I closed my eyes. At 14, she hired a new gardener, Aaron Vance. He taught me the names of the roses. One day, he was planting a rose with his sleeve pushed up, and the scar of an old burn was on his forearm. He didn't say anything. He just showed me. In 6 months, he gathered silent evidence and handed it all to a prosecutor. Violet was arrested before my 15th birthday. Aaron asked that his name not be mentioned. He wouldn't accept money. He said if I wanted to pay him back, I should pay his daughter back one day without her knowing. A hospital, a school, a house. I looked at my hands. They began to shake. The treatment in Boston, I said, in a thread of a voice. The bills in my father's name with my co-signature. It was me, he replied, through an intermediary fund. Your father knew. You weren't supposed to know. The bills with the paid stamp in the shoebox are mine, cleared before you arrived in Newport. The last one, the only one open. Your father insisted on leaving in his own name. He said if you ever needed to understand why this marriage existed, that bill would be the beginning of the answer. He didn't want to give me anything back. He just wanted you to have a thread to pull. The floor of the cottage went soft. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't a debt from your father to me. It was a debt of mine to him. I just needed him to have his final months in peace. He stopped. He continued. 3 weeks after our wedding, I received the first message. Unknown number. Whoever has his heart will pay. I hired a private investigator, Orson Lazar. Violet was listed as an escapee from a medium security prison for 3 years. That's why I didn't touch you. That's why I kept the contract. That's why I slept on the other side of the house. Because if whoever was watching believed you were just a contract wife, you stayed outside the target. And the cabin? I asked. He closed his eyes. At the cabin, I failed. I had fallen in love with you before the cabin, the night you answered Celeste at the gala. At the cabin, I gave myself the right to have one thing before returning it to safety. The next morning, when I said the contract still stood, I was lying to both of us, for your protection. He finally looked at me. Yesterday, at the ball, I received a new message. You are being watched. Whoever has his heart will pay. Today, I scanned the room, and I saw Mrs. Hensley with her hand on your shoulder, her thumb spinning the ring on her pinky. Violet did that my whole life when she gave me orders. It's the only tick she hasn't erased. She changed her face, dyed her hair, got a fake last name, but she couldn't stop spinning the ring. I recognized it in 3 seconds, and in 3 seconds, I decided that the only way to save your life was to distance you from me publicly enough for Violet to believe the marriage was over. He knelt before the sofa, not for romance, to stay at my height. I used the worst sentence of my life on a microphone against you. If you want to kick me out of here now, the door is already on your side. I looked at him, at the gray face, at the eyes that no longer had stone, only exhaustion. Are you finished? Brandon nodded. I stood up. The blanket fell from my shoulder. Now it's my turn, and you're going to listen. I won't be saved. My father sent me to that house because he knew Violet would come back for you one day, and he sent me along so you wouldn't face it alone. That, I only understand now. But my father taught me much more than the name of a rose. He taught me to think. So listen to me. Brandon raised his face. Your plan is weak, I continued. If you keep me away, Violet thinks it's over, vanishes for another 10 years, and comes back to collect from the next person you love. The solution is for her to fall right here, in Newport, inside her old house, by her own words. We set up a public lunch 6 days from now, a bitter reconciliation for the press to see. Mrs. Hensley will want to come comfort me. We invite her for tea in the library. I talk to her alone. You, Theo, and Orson stay by the side door with a recording, and I make her fall by her own words. Brandon looked at me from the floor for a long time. Why would you do that? I reached him, still kneeling, and touched his face with both hands. The first time I had touched him like that since the cabin. Because my father loved you, and I learned to love who he loved. Because you covered his roses at the end of autumn. Because I'm not the kind of woman who lets a foolish man face a villain alone. Brandon pressed his forehead into my palm. One last thing, I said, close to his face. When this is over, if we survive, you're going to have to tell me again what you said yesterday, but in reverse, and this time looking into my eyes, not into a microphone. Brandon opened his eyes. I will. Good, I said. Now stand up. We have a boring old lady to receive. Chapter 6. The Garden. My Father Planted. I returned to the mansion 6 days later. Brandon had stayed in Watch Hill with Theo and Orson. I stayed at my father's cottage, not as punishment, but as strategy. If there were Violet's eyes on the mansion, they needed to see a hurt wife at a remote address and a husband back to business. We talked by phone twice a day and combined codes. Orson researched Mrs. Hensley's past until he found a gap: 3 years without a tax return, a certificate of residence in a private clinic in Connecticut, a denied new passport. The 3 years matched the 3 since Violet Ashcroft's escape. We needed a recording in which she admitted to being inside the mansion before. Theo rehearsed with me, word for word, the list of questions. On the way back, Brandon stopped the car at a rest area. He lowered the window, breathed in the salt, and looked at me. "You can still back out." "I know. If Violet reacts, Orson has men in the garden, in the service hall, and at the side door of the library. Theo will be with me in the next gallery, recording through the microphone Perpetua taped under the armchair. We've rehearsed this for 3 days. I rested my hand on his on the gear shift. His wedding ring was still there. Mine was in an inner pocket of my coat, warmed by my chest. The public lunch was set for 1 in the afternoon. Perpetua had called 2 photographers, people known in the Boston Society columns. Brandon appeared in a blazer without a tie. I arrived later, with the wedding ring back on my finger. Celeste Ashworth-Vey came uninvited. PR had planted the rumor that the marriage was being resumed for financial reasons, and she appeared in a loud blue dress. "Cousin," Brandon said, and his voice was the voice of the first contract dinner. "What a surprise. I heard you two reconciled. I came to bring my regards." "That was very kind," I replied, and extended my hand to her firmly. Celeste always makes sure to be where the important things happen. Celeste blinked once. Theo bit the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. Celeste stayed for coffee. And when she realized Brandon hadn't touched my hand at any point during lunch, and that my gaze was fixed on the entrance porch, she turned to me. "Are you expecting someone else?" "Mrs. Hensley. She was very good to me after the ball." I wanted to return the kindness. Celeste turned a bit pale. She left before 2. Mrs. Hensley arrived at 4 o'clock sharp, with a bouquet of white roses in one hand and a box of pralines in the other, dressed in a pearl gray skirt suit. She hugged me on the porch with the tenderness of someone hugging a recently widowed daughter. "My dear, I had to come. That poor man needs a psychiatrist, and you need a friend. I'll take you to the library. Perpetua has already prepared the tea." I led her through the hall, up the stairs, down the corridor. She recognized the way without asking. I didn't comment. I opened the double doors with both hands. The library was ready. Perpetua had set the tea on the center table with 2 cups and a hot pot. The 2 leather armchairs before the unlit fireplace were turned toward each other. Mrs. Hensley sat in the right armchair. I sat in the left one, the one with the microphone taped underneath. I served the tea. Her hands, when she took the cup, shook just a little. "You must be exhausted," I began. 6 days of this. It's true. No one deserves to be humiliated in public. Do you love my husband?" Mrs. Hensley looked up. She blinked once, quickly, and composed her smile. "Oh dear, in the way one loves a son who was a childhood friend of the family. I saw that boy grow up. His mother died when he was 8. Yes, poor woman. Were you at the funeral?" "I was, in the front row." I nodded slowly. "Do you remember the old gardener? The one who took care of the roses when Brandon was a teenager?" "Ah, that one. Aaron. A good man. Did you know Aaron?" She hesitated for half a second. Her thumb ran over the ring on her pinky finger. 1 short turn. 2. "Through the family, dear. We used to meet at the summer parties. Do you know the name of the first rose bush he planted here?" She blinked again. The ring spun 1 more turn. "A white one, I think. Souvenir de la Malmaison," I replied. "Copper-colored. It was the first." Mrs. Hensley smiled, but the smile this time stayed firmer than it should. She straightened her back in the armchair, set the cup on the saucer with a new calmness, and the catalog grandma tone slipped 2 notes deeper. "Dear, I came here because I like you. I'll be honest. Brandon is a dangerous man. You aren't the first woman he has humiliated in public. You're just the first with the dignity to walk away. That microphone wasn't an accident. He rehearsed every word. I know because I knew his mother, and his mother told me, one afternoon before she died, that she was afraid of her own son. I have a lawyer in Providence who handles these cases with discretion. You could leave Newport with alimony for life in 6 months. You have 300 witnesses to the humiliation. You have a prenuptial agreement with a generous compensation clause. I can accompany you myself, free of charge. Think about it." For an instant, my stomach turned. Not because the story was true. It was because the story had been polished for years. Every sentence fit a woman who had just been publicly humiliated. Every offer had been calibrated for someone who just lost their footing. If I didn't know what I knew, I would have leaned on her arm and cried. I raised the cup to my lips. I drank slowly. I set it down. "You are very well informed about a clause in a prenuptial agreement that never left this house," I said. "And about a mother who died when Brandon was 8, on an afternoon when, according to the medical inventory I read in the library last week, she had been in an induced coma for 2 days. Her ring spun faster. The mask, out of professional integrity, tried to pull itself back together one last time. Photos and documents can be misfiled, dear. Brandon's head is disturbed. Anything he told you about the family, review it calmly before you answer me. When did you learn Brandon's childhood nickname?" "Which nickname, dear?" "Bram. He told me himself. He said only 2 people in the world called him that. His mother, when she was alive, and his stepmother, during the punishments." Her hand stopped on the ring. For a second. It was only a second, but it was the second I needed. "I didn't know his stepmother," she said, and her voice dropped half a tone. "No? Funny. I have 5 photos of you in Brandon's archives, taken at parties from that time. You are in 3 of them standing next to her, smiling." Mrs. Hensley lowered her cup slowly. Her thumb returned to the ring and spun 3 times in a row, now out of control. "Have you ever been in this house before?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "Dear, I think you're confused." "I'm not confused," I replied. "I'm recording." The side door opened. Brandon entered first. Behind him, Theo, holding a small digital recorder at chest level. Behind them both, a short, strong man with gray hair, Orson Lazar. And behind Orson, 2 uniformed police officers. Without haste, without fanfare, Mrs. Hensley stood up. The cup slipped from her fingers and tipped over on the table. "Violet," Brandon said, and his voice was the lowest I had ever heard come out of his mouth. "Sit down." She didn't sit. She looked at me. The sweetness had left her face with the naturalness of someone taking off a cloth mask, and underneath was another face, the same, but with a different musculature, hard, tight in the jaw. "Brat," she said to Brandon, "you've hunted me for years." 20, he replied. "There won't be enough time." There already was. A policeman took her arm firmly. She looked at me one last time, and what came out of her mouth was a whisper intended only for me. "The gardener's daughter. He taught you well." I didn't answer. The arrest happened in silence. Orson led Violet through the side door, down the back hallway, through the garden. Perpetua was at the top of the stone steps, hands folded. Brandon passed in front of her and touched his fingers to her elbow. Once. Perpetua nodded and closed her eyes. Violet crossed the S-shaped bed between the open white rose bushes without turning back. Iron Vance's roses watched her depart for the last time. When the car left, I sat on the stone bench near the central bed, hands on my knees. Brandon sat beside me. "It's over," I said. "It's over," he replied. He rested his hand on mine on the stone bench. He didn't squeeze. He just rested it there. The next morning, he was waiting for me at the start of the gravel path, in linen trousers, no jacket. His gray eyes had the rest of someone who had finally closed their eyes for 8 straight hours. He offered his arm. I accepted. We walked through the garden slowly. He pointed out the roses to me one by one, for the second time. At the back of the bed, near the low stone wall, there was a smaller rose bush I had never noticed. Closed white buds, thin stem. I stopped before it. And this one? Brandon was silent for a moment. Souvenir d'un ami, memory of a friend. Did my father plant it? He did. On the last day he worked here. I was 15. He called me to the back, pointed to this corner and said, "When you miss me, come here. You don't need to speak. She remembers for you." My throat tightened. I came many times, for many years. In the last few months, I started coming here with you on my mind. Every night I thought I was going to lose you forever. I cried. For the first time since my father's funeral, I cried fully, without holding back. Brandon hugged me without squeezing, let my tears wet the shoulder of his shirt, and waited. When the crying subsided, he pulled from his trouser pocket a small metal circle, my wedding ring. He had collected it from the crystal table later, while I was driving to Narragansett. "I loved you since the night you answered Celeste at the gala," he said, and his gray eyes were on mine. No microphone, no 100 faces. "I loved you before the cabin. I loved you at the cabin. I loved you every dawn that I walked from the west side to the east side of this house and stopped in the middle of the hallway because I couldn't go in. I love you now, and I will love you afterward, if you'll let me." I extended my left hand. I'll let you. Brandon placed the ring on my finger. The pressure of his fingers on mine was the same as at the cabin. I closed my hand over his and squeezed back for the first time in 6 months. We stayed there for a while longer, under the souvenir d'un ami, with the Newport wind passing through the rose bushes and the sea crashing in the distance. Then we went up to the house, because Perpetua was waiting to serve breakfast, and because life, for the first time since I had buried my father, didn't need to hurry. Hey, Kay here. That's it for Book 1, but guess what? Book 2 is already done. You can grab access to it for just a small fee. I was fine, at peace, happy in Brandon's arms, finally believing that the contract had turned into real love, until the day I found a forgotten letter among my father's things, a letter that revealed Brandon Ashworth's true identity, and everything I had built collapsed in seconds. Why did my father insist that I marry him of all people? Some pieces never quite fit, I knew that, but when the truth finally clicked before my eyes, I realized there was no direction left, no turning back, no escape possible. Like I said, that was just a taste of Book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and Book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to catch the upcoming ones, look for Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube for the best billionaire and CEO romance content. Remember, the official channels are Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube and the My Stories platform. I'll be waiting for you there. With love, Kay.